Hey guys, so in this final video of mine regarding applications at scale, we're going to talk about microservices and monolithic applications, and I'm going to define the two for you, and then we will talk about the pros and the cons of both approaches and maybe leave you even with one or two tips. So let's get into it. A monolithic application is basically a word that we have given a single application. That sounds very simple, doesn't it? In essence, it is. It's basically how most people start building their own system. Like if you've ever built a web page, odds are that you had a single folder with your code inside of it, and then you deployed it to some server somewhere, a host or something like that, and then they started using that code to serve up your web page. That's a monolithic application. The reason why we call it a monolithic application is because over time, let's say that your company does really well or your product does really well and you add more and more code to it, what usually happens is that as you get more and more users and more code, the system gets heavier and heavier and heavier, and it does more and more things. And the monolithic application idea is that you have this giant entity that does all the things in one single place, in one single code base. And sometimes it's associated with a lot of negativity. It's gotten a bad rap because of all the issues that, for some reason only exist within a monolithic application. I'm not saying that there are not issues, because there absolutely are. And as you probably know, when it comes to computers and programming, there's always pros and cons with everything, like with a lot of things. But that's basically what a monolithic application is. It's just a single code base running all the things that your system can do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is microservices. And microservices is basically the idea that if you want to be able to scale a very, very large system because of the problems that people have with monolithic applications, they've decided that maybe we can create really small applications that just do one thing, and it does it kind of like a function should work. You do one thing and you do that one thing very well. And then you have some way of having all these services talk to each other so that they can trade information and create a more holistic value, if you will. And what's nice about this is that it's very scalable. It allows you to, let's say for the sake of argument, that you see that let's say you have a service that does a lot of image processing. Well, in a monolithic application, you would, in order to handle increased load on that image processing that you're doing, you would have to redeploy multiple instances of the same code base. You would have to have duplicate versions of the same system over and over and over, because you can't just scale that one thing you want to scale up. But that's what microservice allows you to do. You can actually scale up just a fraction of functionality within the whole system. And apart from that, it also allows you to, it gives you a certain level of robustness within the system, where you basically, you can have functionality in multiple places, and if something goes down, usually you have more than one version of that thing just kind of spinning up. Think of it as a network of services that do different things for a large system. It's also called, microservices is one word to use. Another one is distributed systems. And to give you an insight, if you are at the scale that Google and Amazon and Facebook are, this is the way they build these things for the most part, because their systems are so massive and they have thousands of people working on it. There will be no way for them to just run a single monolithic application. It would be way too inefficient for them. So these are the two ways in general that are trendy today, and you should know about both of them, and I want to talk to you about the pros and the cons, because these concepts, you will see them a lot when you start working at scale. Now, let's talk about what's good about microservices. The good part about microservices is that if you have a lot of money and you have a lot of a really large system, this is a very efficient way for you to add more people to your company and make them very, very productive very quickly. Because the problem becomes, if you have multiple groups of people working on different things with the same code base, it becomes a real problem where everybody's touching each other's code, and you get like merge requests and they conflict, and there's all these administrative problems that come with having a monolithic application when you have a lot of people that need to work on the code. So microservices allows you to kind of slice that up and have small teams working just on a small portion of a really, really large system. That's really, really powerful. And that's, in my opinion, the main benefit of having microservices, that you can basically scale the system very quick, a lot larger than what is feasible with a monolithic application. The downside with microservices is that if you get them wrong, if you don't have, because you are taking the simplicity of a monolithic application, because a monolithic application is very simple, and you're putting it into your infrastructure. You increase the complexity of your system by a lot. That's why it's very important that you have a lot of people, and ideally, microservice, in my opinion, should not be used by small companies, because it's going to get really complicated really quickly if you don't have really skilled engineers who know exactly what they're doing. I mean, I've seen tech talks where even really large companies have had had architects who didn't really understand how to structure a system like this, and they fucked up the whole product for the company. So if you can do microservices, you should, in my opinion, do them when you have the size that is needed to make that a valid approach. I mean, we do containers here at my company, but we don't do microservices because it's too early for us as a company. It would absolutely make sense for something like Google, where they have so many teams and so large products. So microservices are awesome, but don't use them too early, because they do come with a lot of complexity. Just warning you. So Docker, Kubernetes, awesome things, but microservices is make sure that you know what you're doing when you're using them. And then we have a monolithic application, which is what the good part about a monolith is that it's very quick to start working with a monolith. I would argue that any small company, even up to really large companies, I mean, a Ticketmaster, which like the product I was working on, that was basically a monolith as well. I mean, they have millions of users, so a monolith is not a bad thing necessarily. It has a bad tone to it, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And what's beautiful about that is that I would say that unless you have a company that is at the scale that you need to have, something like, as I said, like Facebook and Google, if you're not at that massive size, you should absolutely start with a monolithic application, especially if you're a beginner. Just build it that way, because it's going to be the thing that's going to get you to where you want to go fairly easily. The downsides of a monolithic application is that as your product grows, it gets more complicated, and you get problems with maintaining code quality. And if you add more people to the project, you have this problem of managing, as I was saying, like managing who's going to touch what code and not getting conflicts and so forth. And that's, to me, is more of an administration problem than an actual code problem. It used to be like I was sold on microservices as well. I started doing microservices when I had my startup. My personal startup. And I mean, it took me a while to realize how much more complicated I made things, and I could move much faster by just having a monolithic application, because the way that you should think about it is that you have different life cycles in your product. When you first start out, build the thing that is right for right now, like the right thing for the now. Don't think about what's going to happen in 5 years. Think about what's right for your project right now, and usually that has to do with speed. Get value to your customer as quickly as possible. Microservices will not let you do that. Microservices will take longer in general than a monolithic application. Therefore, monolithic applications, in my opinion, is the way to start. When you get to the next phase of your product, if you ever get there, then you start thinking about microservice and you start transitioning into that type of thing. Think of it as building a road for a small town. If if you start building a road, the first thing you focus on is to get the road in place and just having something that is reasonable for the small town that you're in. And then if this town grows into a real city, you upgrade that road to a super highway or something, but you don't start building a super highway right off the bat, because it's wrong for, it's going to take a lot of time and effort, and it's the wrong approach to solving that problem. I hope that makes a bit of sense to you. So and frankly, when it comes to keeping a monolithic application clean and so forth, it is absolutely possible. I mean, as I said, there are really large companies who are running a monolithic application without much in terms of problems, and there are pros and cons to both of these approaches. But now at least you have an understanding of what a microservice architecture is and some of the pros and cons, and you have an understanding of what a monolithic application is and some of the dangers and positive aspects of a monolithic application is. So I hope this has been useful to you. And just to summarize, start with a monolith, transition into microservices when the time is right. And you will know when the time is right by seeing how, basically learning through experience. So start off by that. That's my advice anyway.